Hi guys, this is a team of mobility and COVID-19 related deaths. In our team, we have Julio, Dehong, Srikar, Felix, Tian, and Yipeng, and our sponsor is Justin Silverman. In this project, we split into 3 small groups and use 3 different datasets, which are the Cards Lab dataset, Google dataset, and Apple dataset to do our research. Our objective is to figure out the possible relationship between mobility and COVID-19 disease, and possibly find a predictive model.
Now that everyone has some insights towards the problem we're tackling, I can now go over the various types of plots we decided to use. One of the first issues we had to tackle before plotting our data were the numerous outliers. Since this is publicly collected data, human or technical errors are not that uncommon. To solve this, we ran a type of smoother called a moving average function, which essentially calculates instantaneous averages and uses that knowledge to determine which points are outliers. After this was done, we were ready to plot our mobility versus COVID-19 death plots. Since we are plotting 2 variables that are not on the same scale, we chose to go with the log transformation on both of the lines in order to better display the relationship between the two. The x-axis is used to depict the various states that the data was collected on. Another plot we also thought would be insightful to our study was a cross-correlation chart, or in other words, a CCF plot. This plot was used to evaluate whether there is a correlation between mobility and COVID deaths, not only at that instantaneous point in time, but also if the data was lagged either forward or backwards a certain number of days.
The first dataset which our group explored came from the Dewaths labs, an organization based out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. As an attempt to mitigate the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, their group used an anonymized and de-identified mobile device dataset to measure mobility. Shown on the screen are plots that aim to display the true narrative of the dataset our group worked with. Here we have mobility data provided by the Dewaths labs, plotted versus the number of COVID-19 related deaths in the states of New York and Texas. In addition, we have added cross-correlation plots to see what amount of day lag provides the greatest correlation between both sets. At first look, there appears to be a negatively inverse relationship at certain points of the plot. Also, we see that the correlation is strongest when the data sets are lagged by approximately 1 day. Our group found similar trends in the other 2 data sets of the time series analysis.
For Google Mobility Dataset, it also contains the number of deaths from each state by date. Especially Google categorized the mobility into 6 different places in terms of mobility. The mobility represents the percentage change from the baseline, where the baseline is the January, where it is before the COVID-19 disease spread out. When we see the visual plot on New York, we can clearly see the inverse relationship on the work, as we can observe from other datasets. What is interesting, Google has a residential category where it shows positive relationship with the mobility and death. This makes sense because the residential represents the mobility in indoor movement.
For the Apple dataset, the graph at the top shows the relationship between mobility and death in New York State and Texas State. The red line is death and the blue line is mobility. At the bottom graphs, they show the cross-correlation between mobility and death. The x-axis is the time length. The rotation for our data is 5 weeks, which means each line represents 1 day in the graph. And the y-axis is the autocorrelation, which means how related it is. The number on the y-axis are just a percentage that is related in the graph. If the line is outside the blue line, then it means they are related. If it is inside, then it is not related.
Based on the results of our research and the models that we created, we can conclude that mobility is not a good predictor of coronavirus deaths. Just because there is some correlation in some of the states does not mean that we can look at mobility as a factor that affects the rise in deaths. Rather, it seems more to us that the mobility data occurs as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic.